For 3 years, Daniel Thompson and his service dog, Atlas, walked the same abandoned field outside Cedar Ridge, never knowing what lay buried beneath their feet. The townspeople saw a struggling veteran trying to find peace, but when Atlas started digging one September morning and unearthed a weathered American flag wrapped around a waterproof case, everything changed. What Daniel didn't know was that this flag had been waiting 60 years for someone exactly like him to find it. And the note inside didn't just explain why it was buried, it revealed a promise that would change his life forever. This is the story of how one forgotten act of honor connected 2 generations of sacrifice. The morning cold settled into Daniel Thompson's bones as he counted the bills spread across his kitchen table for the 3rd time. $47. Rent was due in 5 days, and Mrs. Henderson had already knocked twice this week, her patience wearing as thin as the carpet in his studio apartment on Maple Street. Daniel pushed the money aside and looked at Atlas, his German Shepherd mix lying by the door with his head on his paws. The dog's dark eyes tracked every movement, the way they had since the VA paired them 2 years ago. Atlas had been his anchor through the worst nights, when the memories from Kandahar pressed too close and breathing felt like drowning. "We'll figure it out, boy," Daniel said, though he didn't know how. He opened the cabinet where he kept their food. 1 can of soup for him, half a bag of dog food for Atlas, maybe 3 days' worth if he stretched it. His last check from the hardware store had been lighter than expected. They'd cut his hours again when he'd missed 2 shifts during a bad week. The field. That's where they'd go today. The abandoned property on the edge of town where Daniel could breathe, where Atlas could run, where for a few hours the walls didn't feel like they were closing in. The owner had died years ago, and the land sat waiting for distant relatives who never came. Daniel had asked around. No one cared if he walked there. He filled Atlas's bowl with the last of yesterday's kibble and watched the dog eat. His own stomach growled, but he ignored it. He'd eaten yesterday. That was enough. The walk to the field took 20 minutes. September sun warmed the air, but Daniel kept his jacket on. It hid how much weight he'd lost. Cedar Ridge was a small town, the kind where everyone knew everyone's business, and he'd caught the pitying looks from people who remembered him before deployment, back when he'd played baseball and dated Sarah Mitchell and believed the world made sense. Atlas trotted ahead, nose to the ground, tail wagging. The dog had a routine now. Check the fence line, investigate the old oak tree, make a wide circle through the tall grass. Daniel followed the worn path they'd created over months of daily visits. He settled onto a flat boulder near the center of the field and pulled out the notebook he always carried. His therapist at the VA had suggested writing when the thoughts got too loud. Most days, the pages stayed blank. Today felt like a blank page kind of day. Atlas disappeared into the grass, hunting field mice or shadows or whatever dogs hunted when their people were too tired to play. Daniel closed his eyes and tilted his face toward the sun. The warmth helped. Everything felt less impossible in the light. A sharp bark made him open his eyes. Atlas was digging furiously about 30 yards away, dirt flying behind him in great sprays of earth and grass. The dog barked again, insistent. "Atlas, come!" The dog ignored him, digging deeper. His whole front half disappeared into the hole. Daniel stood, joints protesting, and walked over. "What'd you find, boy? Another rabbit hole?" But Atlas wasn't chasing prey. He'd stopped digging and was pulling at something, growling and tugging. Daniel knelt beside him and brushed away loose soil. Fabric, red, white, and blue fabric, faded and dirt-stained but unmistakable. His breath caught. An American flag buried in the ground. His hands shook as he carefully uncovered it, pulling away earth with the same reverence he'd learned at funeral details. The flag was wrapped around something hard, something square, a case of some kind, olive green and military issue. Atlas sat panting, watching Daniel work. The flag came free. Daniel stood holding it, dirt cascading off the folds. It was old. The material felt different from modern flags, heavier. He counted the stars. 48. This flag predated Alaska and Hawaii. His mind raced. Someone had buried this deliberately, had wrapped it around something worth protecting. His hands found the clasps on the case. They resisted, corroded with age, but gave way with pressure. Inside, papers sealed in plastic, photographs yellow with time, a Purple Heart medal, and a letter the envelope addressed in careful handwriting to whoever finds this. Daniel's vision blurred. He knew somehow that opening this letter would change everything, that whatever lay written in those pages had been waiting all these years for someone who would understand. He sat down in the dirt, Atlas pressing against his side, and unsealed the envelope with trembling fingers. The letter was dated August 15th, 1963. The handwriting was steady despite what the words revealed. To whoever finds this, my name is Captain Thomas Whitmore. I buried this flag and these items in my family's field because I know I won't make it back from Vietnam. The doctors gave me 6 months. Cancer, too far gone for treatment. I've asked for one last deployment anyway. If I have to die, I'd rather do it serving than waiting in a hospital bed. This flag flew over our base in Korea. It covered the casket of my best friend, Sergeant James Morrison. When they gave it to his family, his widow pressed it back into my hands and said, "Keep it safe. Bring it home." She died 2 years later. Grief, the doctor said, but I knew better. A broken heart doesn't show up on medical charts. I couldn't keep my promise to bring it home. So I'm burying it here, on the land I grew up on, the land I loved. Someday, someone will find this. If you're reading this, I believe it's because you were meant to. Maybe you're like me, someone who served, someone who understands what it means to carry the weight of others' sacrifices. There's more in this case, deed to this land. My grandfather bought it in 1923. No heirs left now. My wife and I never had children, and she passed 5 years ago. Consider it yours. Not payment, not charity. A gift from one soldier to another. Because if you found this, if you were drawn to this place, you understand what this ground means. All I ask is this. Fly the flag on Memorial Day. Remember James, remember all of them. Don't let the ground forget. With respect and hope, Captain Thomas Whitmore. Daniel read it twice, 3 times. The words didn't change. He pulled out the other papers. A deed, yellowed but official. 43 acres, free and clear. A photograph of a young soldier with his arm around another young soldier, both grinning at the camera. On the back, written in the same careful hand, Tom and James, Fort Riley, 1951. The Purple Heart lay at the bottom of the case, the ribbon faded but intact. Atlas whined softly, pressing closer. Daniel realized he was crying, tears cutting clean tracks through the dirt on his face. His hands shook as he carefully rewrapped everything. He looked around the field with new eyes. This wasn't abandoned land, it was sacred ground, a soldier's last post. And somehow, impossibly, it was his. The walk home felt dreamlike. Daniel clutched the case to his chest, the flag draped over his arm. People stared. Mrs. Chen from the grocery store, Bobby Martinez from the gas station. He didn't care. His mind spun with impossibilities. He had land, real land, worth something. Worth. He didn't even know. Enough to pay rent, enough to buy food, enough to breathe. Back in his apartment, he spread everything on the table, pushing aside the $47 that now seemed both pathetic and precious. He Googled property values in Cedar Ridge. His hands shook so badly he could barely type. Comparable properties, $180,000, $220,000, $275,000. He sat back hard enough to make the chair creak. It wasn't possible. Things like this didn't happen to people like him. There had to be a catch, some legal complication, some reason this miracle couldn't be real. The letter sat propped against his coffee cup. If you found this, if you were drawn to this place, you understand what this ground means. Daniel understood. God, he understood. That field had been his salvation for 2 years, the only place where the weight lifted, where Atlas could run free, where he could sit in the sun and remember what peace felt like. Captain Whitmore had known. Somehow, across 60 years, he'd known. Atlas nudged Daniel's hand with his nose. Right, the dog needed dinner. Daniel looked at the half-empty bag of food, then at the deed on the table. He could sell the land, pay off debt, start over, maybe even go back to school like he'd planned before deployment. But the letter's request echoed, "Fly the flag on Memorial Day. Remember James, remember all of them." That was 9 months away. Daniel could hold on 9 months. He could honor this gift properly, do it right. He fed Atlas the last of the kibble and ate the can of soup cold, standing at the counter. Tomorrow he'd go to the county office, verify the deed was real, start the legal process. Tomorrow he'd figure out how to pay rent with $47. Tonight, he sat on his floor with Atlas's head in his lap and carefully folded the flag the way he'd learned in basic training. Triangle fold, stars showing, precise and respectful. He placed the purple heart on top. "Someone remembered, boy," he whispered to Atlas. "Someone understood." The dog sighed and settled heavier against him. Outside, Cedar Ridge prepared for evening. Inside, Daniel Thompson held a 60-year-old promise and let himself believe, just for tonight, that maybe things could be different. He fell asleep on the floor, the flag as his pillow, and for the first time in months, the nightmares didn't come. Across town in the Cedar Ridge Historical Society office, Margaret Fairchild was preparing to close when her phone rang. She almost didn't answer. It was past 5, and her arthritis was complaining about the cold front moving in. "Cedar Ridge Historical Society, Margaret speaking." "Ma'am, this is Daniel Thompson. I found something. In a field, a flag and a letter from a Captain Thomas Whitmore." Margaret's breath caught. She gripped the edge of her desk. "Say that name again." "Thomas Whitmore, Captain. The letter's dated 1963. "Don't move. Don't do anything. What's your address?" 20 minutes later, Margaret stood in Daniel's tiny apartment, her hands trembling as she held the letter. She was 83 years old, and she'd spent 62 of those years wondering what happened to her uncle. "You're related to him?" Daniel asked, watching her read. "He was my mother's brother." Margaret's voice shook. "He left for Vietnam in August 1963. We got a telegram in October saying he'd died in combat. My mother spent the rest of her life believing he'd died alone in some jungle, afraid and in pain. We never knew about the cancer. He never told us." She touched the photograph of the 2 young soldiers. "James Morrison. I remember him. He came to Sunday dinners at our house, him and his wife Betty. When James died, Uncle Tom, he changed, got quieter. Betty died not long after, and Uncle Tom stopped coming around, said it hurt too much to visit." "The land," Daniel said carefully. "The deed says—" "I know what it says." Margaret set down the letter and looked at him properly for the first time. She saw the weight he carried, the shadows under his eyes, the way he held himself like someone expecting the next blow. She saw her uncle in him. "You served," she said. Not a question. "Army, 2 tours in Afghanistan. And you've been walking that field for 2 years. It's the only place I feel okay." Margaret's eyes filled. He knew. Uncle Tom always knew. He used to say that land had healing in it, that the quiet there could fix what words couldn't. She picked up the deed. "This is legal, binding. I've spent years researching my family history. The land passed to the county when no heirs claimed it, but the deed supersedes that. It's yours." Daniel shook his head. "I can't take your family's land. You already have." Margaret's voice was fierce. "Don't you see? This is what he wanted. This is what he planned. Uncle Tom always said the land would know who needed it. You found it because you were supposed to find it." And then she pulled out her phone with shaking hands and made a call. "William, it's Mother. I need you to come to Cedar Ridge tonight." "No, I'm fine. But I found something." She paused. "Your great-uncle's final letter, and the man he meant to find it." Margaret's son arrived 2 hours later. William Fairchild was a lawyer in the city, tall and precise, with his great-uncle's steady eyes. He studied the deed, made calls, verified records. "It's authentic," he said finally. "The land will transfer to Mr. Thompson. There's back taxes, about $8,000, but once those are paid, it's his free and clear." Daniel's stomach dropped. $8,000. He had $47. "I'll pay the taxes," Margaret said immediately. "Ma'am, it's not charity. It's family obligation. Uncle Tom left that land in trust. You found it. You'll honor it. That's all that matters." William nodded. "I'll handle the paperwork. Should take about 6 weeks to finalize." He looked at Daniel. "Have you thought about what you'll do with it?" Daniel touched the flag, still carefully folded. Honor it, the way he asked. Margaret stood, suddenly looking every one of her 83 years. Will you let me come? On Memorial Day? To see the flag fly? Yes, ma'am. She squeezed his hand, her grip surprisingly strong. He would have liked you. Uncle Tom always believed the land chose its people. Thank you for finding him, for bringing him home to us in a way. After they left, Daniel sat with Atlas and looked at the deed again. 6 weeks. He had to survive 6 weeks, and then he'd have land, real land, a place that was his. The letter sat propped against the lamp. Don't let the ground forget. He wouldn't. Whatever it took, he'd keep that promise. The 6 weeks felt like 6 years. Mrs. Henderson accepted $30 of Daniel's $47 as partial rent payment, her mouth a thin line of disapproval. The rest by the end of the month, Mr. Thompson. He spent his remaining $17 on dog food, a small bag from the discount store, the kind that Atlas ate without enthusiasm but ate nonetheless. For himself, Daniel relied on the food bank on Tuesdays and Thursdays, standing in line with the other ghosts of Cedar Ridge, people who'd learned to swallow pride along with expired bread in dented cans. His hours at the hardware store dried up completely. Budget cuts, his manager said, not meeting his eyes. Daniel suspected the truth had more to do with the day he'd locked himself in the supply closet during a panic attack, with the way his hands sometimes shook too badly to operate the register. He sold his laptop for $40 to a pawn shop, then his old guitar for $25. The money went to Mrs. Henderson, who accepted it with a sniff and a reminder about proper notice next time. But every day Daniel walked to the field. Every day Atlas ran through the grass, and Daniel sat on their boulder and felt the earth steady him. He brought the flag sometimes, kept carefully in its case, and traced the faded stars with his fingers. William Fairchild called weekly with updates, paperwork filed, taxes being processed, title search completed. Each call brought the promise closer, but closer didn't fill Daniel's stomach or pay his rent. On week 4, Daniel's apartment key stuck in the lock. He jiggled it, Atlas sitting patiently beside him. The door opened to reveal Mrs. Henderson standing in his living space, her face grim. Mr. Thompson, the rent. I'll have it. You said that last week and the week before. She sighed. I have someone interested in the unit. Family with steady income. I'll need you out by month's end. The floor tilted. Please, I have money coming, a property transfer. I can show you the paperwork. I've heard every story there is. But her voice softened slightly. I'll give you until the transfer completes, but not a day longer. After she left, Daniel sat on his mattress and called William. How much longer? 2 weeks, maybe 3. These things move slowly. I'm being evicted. Silence on the line. Then, I'll see what I can do to expedite. That night, Daniel used the last of his money to buy Atlas a proper meal from the butcher, ground beef, fresh and red. He cooked it in his tiny kitchen and watched the dog eat with the kind of joy Daniel had forgotten existed. His own stomach growled, but he'd learned to ignore hunger. He'd survived on less in Kandahar, had gone days on nothing but adrenaline and fear. This was nothing. This was temporary. He pulled out the photograph from Captain Whitmore's case, Tom and James, young and grinning, their whole lives ahead of them. James would never see his 30s. Tom would die alone in a jungle, cancer eating him from inside, choosing to fall in battle rather than in a hospital bed. And here Daniel was, drowning in self-pity over missing meals and unpaid rent. He was ashamed. The next morning, Daniel went to the field earlier than usual. Frost silvered the grass, and his breath fogged in the cold. Atlas bounded ahead, steam rising from his coat. The sun broke over the trees, flooding the field with golden light. Daniel stood where they'd found the flag and pushed his hands into his pockets. This ground had held a promise for 60 years. It could hold him for 2 more weeks. He walked to the old oak tree at the field's edge and found what he'd noticed on previous visits, a hollow in the trunk, dry and protected. Big enough for a person. Not comfortable, but shelter. If Mrs. Henderson followed through, if he couldn't make rent, he and Atlas could sleep here. He'd done harder things. The cold wouldn't kill him. The field would keep them safe until the transfer completed. It was a backup plan. A terrible backup plan. But Daniel had learned in the Army to always have a fallback position. On the walk back to town, he stopped at the Cedar Ridge Diner. The owner, Frank Dennison, was wiping down tables. Daniel had gone to school with Frank's daughter. "Frank, I'm looking for work, anything. Washing dishes, bussing tables, whatever you need." Frank studied him. "You okay, Thompson?" "No, sir, but I will be. Just need to make it a couple weeks." Something in Frank's face shifted. "Kitchen needs scrubbing. Back's thrown out my regular guy. Pays cash, under the table, $5 an hour. Can you start now?" Daniel nodded, throat tight. "Yes, sir." He spent 6 hours scrubbing years of grease from industrial ovens and tile grout. His back screamed, his hands burned from chemicals. Frank paid him $30 and sent him home with a bag of leftover meatloaf and mashed potatoes. Daniel split the meatloaf with Atlas and ate the potatoes cold, standing in his kitchen while the dog wagged his tail. It was the best meal he'd had in weeks. That night, curled on his mattress with Atlas pressed against his side, Daniel opened his notebook and wrote, "Day 28, 2 weeks left, job at the diner. Atlas is fed, I'm fed. The field is waiting. Captain Whitmore believed the land chose its people. I have to believe he was right. I have to believe I can make it 2 more weeks. I think James Morrison would have liked the meatloaf." He closed the notebook and stared at the ceiling. Outside, Cedar Ridge slept. Inside, Daniel Thompson held on and counted days. The call came on a Tuesday morning while Daniel was elbow-deep in dishwater at the diner. "Mr. Thompson, William Fairchild. The transfer is complete. The land is yours." Daniel's hands went numb. The plate he'd been washing slipped back into the water with a splash. "It's done?" "Finalized this morning. I'm driving up this afternoon with the paperwork. Can you meet me at the field at 3? Daniel left work early, Frank waving him off with understanding. He walked to the field with Atlas, his heart hammering. The morning was cold enough to need gloves he didn't own, but he barely felt it. William was already there, standing beside a black sedan with an older woman Daniel didn't recognize. Margaret emerged from the passenger side, moving carefully. "Mr. Thompson," William said, extending his hand, "congratulations. You're a landowner." The papers felt impossibly heavy in Daniel's hands. His name, Daniel Robert Thompson. 43 acres, free and clear. "There's someone who wanted to meet you," Margaret said, gesturing to the woman. "This is Betty Morrison, James Morrison's daughter." Daniel's breath stopped. The woman was in her 70s, silver-haired and small, but her eyes were sharp and kind. She stepped forward and took both his hands in hers. "My father's flag," she said softly. "Mother gave it to Captain Whitmore the day they buried Dad. I was 6 years old. I remember her pressing it into his hands and telling him to keep it safe." Her voice broke. "We never saw it again. We thought it was lost. That piece of Dad was just gone. Ma'am, Betty, please." She squeezed his hands. "Margaret called me when you found this. I had to come. I had to see." Daniel walked to the boulder where he'd left the case and carefully removed the flag. He unfolded it, his hands steady despite everything, and held it out to Betty. She touched the fabric with trembling fingers, tears streaming down her face. "It's real. God, it's real. He kept his promise. Captain Whitmore kept his promise." "He did more than that," Margaret said. She produced the letter, now carefully preserved in protective plastic. "May I?" Betty read it slowly, one hand pressed to her mouth. When she finished, she looked at Daniel. "You served?" "Yes, ma'am." "My father would have liked you. Captain Whitmore knew what he was doing, giving this land to a soldier, keeping the circle unbroken." William cleared his throat. "There's something else. Mother and I discussed this, and Betty agreed. The land is worth approximately $240,000. You could sell it, take the money, start fresh somewhere else." Daniel opened his mouth to respond, but William held up a hand. "Or you could keep it, build something here. Betty wants to fund a memorial, a proper flagpole, a plaque, a place for people to come on Memorial Day and remember. She's prepared to donate $50,000 toward developing the land appropriately." The world tilted. Daniel sat down hard on the boulder. "I don't understand." Betty sat beside him, Atlas immediately placing his head on her lap. She stroked the dog's ears. "My father died in 1952. I've spent my whole life with a hole where he should have been. Captain Whitmore carried that weight too. He lost his best friend. and then he lost himself. This land, this flag, this promise he made, it's a memorial. But it's also a gift to you so you don't end up like them, lost and alone and carrying ghosts. She turned to face him fully. I'm 81 years old. I made a fortune in real estate and I have no children. I've been looking for a way to honor my father that matters. This is it. You're it. I'm nobody. You're a veteran who found a flag buried by another veteran and understood what it meant, Margaret said firmly. That's not nobody. That's exactly who this land was waiting for. William opened his briefcase. Betty has a proposal. She'll fund the memorial and provide capital for you to build. A small house, nothing extravagant, but enough. In exchange, you maintain the memorial, fly the flag on holidays, and let veterans visit. Make it a place of healing, like it's been for you. Daniel's vision blurred. Why would you do this? Because Captain Whitmore was right, Betty said. The land chooses its people, and you chose to honor a promise you didn't have to keep. That's worth something. That's worth everything. Atlas whined softly, sensing Daniel's emotion. The dog pressed against his leg, warm and solid. Daniel looked across the field, his field now, and saw not just empty land but possibility. A place to build, a place to belong, a place where other men like him could come and remember they weren't alone. I don't know how to build houses, he said finally. William smiled. We know a contractor, very reasonable rates. Betty's donation covers it. I'll work, Daniel said fiercely. I'll work on it myself. I'll earn this. We know you will, Margaret said. That's why we're offering. The sun broke through the clouds, flooding the field with light. Daniel looked at the three people who'd appeared in his life because he'd been walking a dog in an abandoned field, because Atlas had started digging, because 60 years ago a dying soldier had believed in a future he'd never see. I'll do it, he whispered. I'll honor them. All of them. I promise. Betty reached into her purse and pulled out a photograph. Worn at the edges, colors faded. James Morrison in his uniform, young and grinning, standing beside a young woman with a baby in her arms. My mother and me, Betty said. The day before he shipped out, he never came home. But maybe... She pressed the photo into Daniel's hands. Maybe this can be home, for all the ones who need it. Daniel held the photograph carefully. This piece of history, this fragment of a family's heart. He thought of Captain Whitmore, dying alone in the jungle, of James Morrison, who never got to watch his daughter grow up, of all the ghosts that haunted fields and forests and the spaces between heartbeats. Welcome home, Dad, Betty whispered to the field. Welcome home. And for the first time in years, Daniel Thompson believed he might be home too. Daniel stared at the check Betty had written. $50,000 made out to him, her signature flowing and confident across the bottom. His hands shook so badly the paper rattled. I can't take this, he said, trying to hand it back. This is too much. I didn't do anything to deserve... You found the flag, Betty interrupted gently. You read the letter, and instead of selling the land and walking away, you called the Historical Society. You brought us into this story. That deserves something. I just made a phone call. You honored a soldier's last request, Margaret said. Most people would have seen dollar signs. You saw duty. Daniel shook his head. That's just doing what's right. Anyone would... They wouldn't. William's voice was firm. I've practiced law for 30 years. I've seen what people do when they find something valuable. They take, they rationalize, they forget any obligations that don't benefit them. You didn't do that. Betty stood, brushing grass from her slacks. Daniel, may I tell you something about my father? He nodded, not trusting his voice. When I was a little girl, before Dad shipped out, he told me a story. He said that in war, he'd seen men do terrible things and beautiful things, sometimes in the same moment. He said the difference between a good person and a bad person wasn't whether they were tempted to take the easy path. Everyone was. It was whether they took it. She touched the flag still folded on the boulder. You had every reason to sell this land quickly, take the money, solve your problems. Margaret tells me you're being evicted. William says you've been working at the diner for $5 an hour. You're hungry and broke and barely hanging on. But when you found this, She gestured at the case, the letter, the flag. You saw something bigger than yourself. That's rare. That's precious. Daniel's throat ached. I'm not special. Neither was my father. Neither was Captain Whitmore. They were just men who showed up when it mattered. Betty's eyes filled. That's all any of us can do. Show up, try, care. Atlas nudged Daniel's hand, and he buried his fingers in the dog's thick fur, anchoring himself. I don't know how to build a memorial, he said finally. I don't know how to maintain a place like this. I've been living in a studio apartment, eating from food banks. How am I supposed to— You'll learn, Margaret said. We'll help. That's what communities do. I don't want to be a charity case. William laughed, but it was kind. You're not. Betty isn't giving you this money out of pity. She's investing in a vision, a memorial that matters, a place that serves a purpose. You're the steward, not the recipient. Steward, Daniel repeated. The word felt weighty, important. Someone who cares for something on behalf of others, Betty explained. Someone who holds trust. I'm trusting you with my father's memory. Captain Whitmore trusted you with his land. That's not charity. That's responsibility. Daniel looked at the check again. Numbers that could solve every immediate problem. Rent, food, medical bills from his last panic attack, the debt collectors who'd started calling. Numbers that represented a future beyond day-to-day survival. What if I fail? The words came out small, afraid. What if I can't do this right? Then you try again, Margaret said simply. That's what my uncle would say. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to care. Betty sat down beside him, moving slowly, and took his hand. Hers was soft and small, but strong. I'm 81 years old. I've built and lost and rebuilt, and I've learned something. The people worth trusting are the ones who are afraid of letting others down, the ones who worry they're not enough, because those are the people who try harder, care more, show up even when it's hard. I'm scared, Daniel admitted. I'm scared I'll mess this up, that I'll let your father down, let Captain Whitmore down. Good, Betty said. That fear will keep you honest, keep you humble, keep you trying. William pulled out more papers. Here's what we're proposing. Betty funds construction of a small house, 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, simple but solid. She funds the memorial, flagpole, plaque, maybe a small pavilion where people can sit and reflect. In exchange, you live here, maintain the property, and allow visitors on holidays and by appointment. No rent, no mortgage. The land is yours. The memorial is shared. What about income? Margaret asked. He'll need to eat. Betty smiled. I'm also proposing a small stipend, $2,000 a month. That's not charity. That's payment for maintaining the memorial, for being present, for serving as caretaker. It's a job. Daniel's chest felt too tight. His eyes burned. Why are you being so kind? Because someone was kind to me once, Betty said softly. When my mother died, when I was 17 and alone and terrified, a neighbor took me in, fed me, helped me finish school. Didn't ask for anything in return except that I pass it forward. So I am. I'm passing forward the kindness that saved me. She squeezed his hand. This isn't about you being worthy or deserving. This is about me fulfilling a promise to my father's memory. You're giving me a way to honor him that matters. That's the gift. You're giving me purpose. Daniel couldn't stop the tears. They came hot and fast, years of pressure finally breaking through the walls he'd built. Atlas pressed against him, whining softly. Margaret produced a handkerchief, actual cloth, monogrammed with her initials. I'll do it, he managed. I'll do whatever it takes. I'll make this place something they'd be proud of. We know, William said. That's why we're here. Betty stood and helped Daniel to his feet. Come on, I want to walk the property with you. Show me where you think the memorial should go. Tell me your vision. They walked the field together. Daniel, Betty, Margaret, William, and Atlas ranging ahead. The afternoon sun warmed the cold earth. Daniel pointed out the oak tree, the boulder, the natural clearing where the flag had been buried. Here, he said. The memorial should be here, where Captain Whitmore chose to bury his promise. Betty nodded, smiling. Perfect. We'll put a circle of stones around the flagpole, plant native grasses, maybe a bench where people can sit. And a plaque, Margaret added, with both names, James Morrison and Thomas Whitmore, brothers in arms. Partners in sacrifice, Betty said softly. They stood in silence, the four of them, and let the field settle around them. Somewhere a crow called. The wind rustled through dry grass. Atlas barked once, chasing a rabbit that vanished into brambles. Thank you, Daniel said, the words inadequate but sincere. Thank you for seeing something in me I couldn't see in myself. Thank you for being someone worth seeing, Betty replied. And in that moment, standing on ground that had waited 60 years to fulfill its purpose, Daniel Thompson felt something he hadn't felt in years. Hope, real hope, the kind that didn't die when the night came, the kind that built foundations. He folded the check carefully and put it in his pocket. Not money, responsibility, trust. A promise he would keep. Let's build something beautiful, he said. We already are, Margaret replied, smiling through tears. 3 months later, the house stood complete, small but solid, with windows that caught the morning light and a porch where Daniel could sit and watch the field wake up. The contractor, a Vietnam veteran named Michael Bennett, had worked slowly and carefully, teaching Daniel every step. By the end, Daniel could frame a wall, run plumbing, wire a circuit. You've got good hands, Michael said on the last day, surveying the finished structure. Steady, careful. That matters in construction. Daniel ran his palm along the doorframe, feeling the smooth wood, the solid joinery. I never built anything before, just destroyed things. That's war, Michael said. This is peace, different skills required. The house had 2 bedrooms, one for Daniel, one for guests. Visitors, Betty called them, veterans who needed a quiet place to heal, to think, to remember they were more than their worst moments. The bathroom had a walk-in shower with grab bars. The kitchen was simple but functional, nothing fancy, everything necessary. Daniel moved in on a Tuesday, his possessions fitting in 2 boxes and a duffel bag. Atlas claimed the sunny spot by the front window immediately, circling 3 times before settling with a satisfied groan. Welcome home, boy, Daniel whispered. The memorial was taking longer. Betty had hired a sculptor to design the plaque, bronze, with James Morrison's photograph etched into one side and Thomas Whitmore's on the other. The flagpole was marine-grade aluminum, 30 feet tall, with a solar light that would keep the flag illuminated through the night. Betty visited every week, bringing lunch and walking the property with Daniel. She was frailer than she'd been in September, moving slower, needing to rest more often. But her mind was sharp, and her heart was fierce. You've been helping at the VA, she said one afternoon, sitting on the porch while Daniel and Atlas worked on clearing brush. Just transportation, Daniel said, embarrassed. Driving guys to appointments, nothing special. It's special to them. Betty sipped her tea. Margaret says you've also been volunteering at the food bank. They helped me. I'm returning the favor. You're doing what you've always done, Betty said, showing up for people who need someone. Even when you didn't have anything, you gave what you could. Daniel set down the shovel and sat on the porch steps. My therapist says it's easier to help others than help myself, that I'm avoiding my own healing by focusing on other people's problems. Maybe, Betty said. Or maybe you're figuring out who you are by being useful. That's not avoidance. That's identity. That's purpose. They sat in comfortable silence. A hawk circled overhead. Atlas barked at a squirrel. Betty, Daniel said carefully, why do you really come here every week? Be honest. She smiled, the expression soft and sad. Because you remind me of my father. You have his eyes, not the color, but the look. Like you've seen things you can't unsee and you're trying anyway to find something worth believing in. Did he find it? I don't know. He died before he could tell me. Betty set down her cup. But Captain Whitmore found it. He found it in this land, in the promise he made to James, and I think you're finding it too. In this place, in helping others, in keeping promises. Daniel's throat tightened. I think about them all the time. James and the captain, what they went through, what they sacrificed. I'm just some guy who got lucky finding a flag. You're a veteran who understood what that flag meant, Betty corrected, who chose honor over easy money, who built this place with his own hands. She gestured at the house, the cleared land, the framework of the memorial rising from the earth. This is what legacy looks like. Not monuments built by strangers, places built by people who care. A car pulled up the dirt road, Margaret and William arriving for their weekly visit. They'd started coming together, bringing supplies, helping with the memorial, a family forming around a shared purpose. Margaret produced a basket, sandwiches, and Frank sent pie from the diner. They ate lunch on the porch, talking about the memorial's progress, about the dedication ceremony planned for Memorial Day, about the veterans who'd already called asking to visit. "We might need more than one guest room," William observed. "The interest is higher than expected." "I've been thinking about that," Daniel said. "There's that old barn foundation near the oak tree. We could build something there, a small cabin, nothing fancy, just another space for someone who needs quiet." Betty's eyes lit up. "I'll fund it. Let's make this place what it should be, a sanctuary, a home for the ones who need it most." After they left, Daniel walked the property with Atlas, checking fences and dreaming about cabins and gardens and paths that would lead wounded men back to themselves. The sun set, painting the sky orange and pink and purple. He stopped at the boulder where Atlas had first started digging, where everything had changed. The memorial was nearly complete, the flagpole rising from concrete, the plaque's bronze catching the dying light. "We're doing it," he told Atlas. "We're keeping the promise." The dog wagged his tail and pressed against Daniel's leg. They stood together as night fell, and for the first time in years, Daniel Thompson felt at peace. Not because his problems were solved or his past erased, but because he'd found something worth building, something worth protecting. Purpose. He went inside, Atlas at his heels, and made dinner in his kitchen, in his house, on his land. Through the window, he could see the flagpole silhouetted against the darkening sky. Tomorrow he'd raise the flag for the first time. Tomorrow he'd begin the work of building the cabin. Tomorrow he'd call the veteran who'd left a message asking about visiting. But tonight, he'd rest. He'd earned that much. Memorial Day arrived warm and clear, the sky so blue it hurt to look at. By 8 in the morning, cars lined the dirt road leading to the memorial. Daniel stood beside the flagpole, hands shaking slightly, as veterans and townspeople gathered in the clearing. Betty sat in the front row, Margaret beside her, both women dressed in their finest. William stood near the back, his arm around his mother's shoulders. Frank from the diner had come, and Mrs. Henderson and Bobby Martinez. Michael Bennett stood with his grown children, his eyes wet and proud. The flag, Captain Whitmore's flag, James Morrison's flag, hung folded and waiting on a table beside the plaque. Daniel cleared his throat. Public speaking terrified him, but this wasn't about him. This was about them, about promises kept. "Thank you all for coming," he began. "Most of you know the story by now. How my dog Atlas found this flag buried in this field. How a letter from Captain Thomas Whitmore connected us to his niece Margaret, to James Morrison's daughter Betty, to a promise made 60 years ago." He touched the plaque. Captain Whitmore wrote that he believed this land would choose its people, that someone would find his message who would understand what it meant. I didn't understand it first. I was broke and hungry and barely hanging on. But when I read his words, when I learned about James Morrison and Betty, and everything these men sacrificed, I understood that some things matter more than survival. Some things matter more than ourselves. Betty wiped her eyes. Margaret squeezed her hand. "This memorial isn't just about James and Captain Whitmore," Daniel continued. "It's about all of them. Every person who served, every person who sacrificed, every person who came home different than they left." He looked at the gathered crowd. "It's for us. For the ones still fighting. Still trying to figure out how to be normal when nothing feels normal anymore." He picked up the flag, feeling its weight, its history. "I'm going to raise this flag now. And starting today, it'll fly here every day. Not just holidays, every day. Because every day someone needs to remember they're not alone. Every day someone needs to know their sacrifice mattered." Daniel attached the flag to the rope, and Michael stepped forward to help him raise it. Slowly, carefully, the flag ascended the pole. It caught the wind at the top and unfurled. Red and white and blue, 48 stars, 60-year-old fabric still strong, still beautiful. The crowd stood, hands over hearts. Someone began singing the national anthem, a voice Daniel recognized from the VA, rough and earnest. Others joined. The sounds swelled, imperfect and powerful, voices carrying across the field and into the morning air. Daniel stood at attention, tears streaming down his face, and felt something shift in his chest. Not healing. Healing was too simple a word, but understanding. Acceptance. The beginning of peace. When the anthem ended, Betty stood. Daniel helped her to the front, her hands trembling but her voice steady. "My father died when I was 6 years old," she said. "I grew up without him, without his voice, his laughter, his guidance. But I always had his legacy, stories of his kindness, his courage, his love." She touched the plaque where her father's image had been etched. "This memorial gives me something I never had, a place to visit him, to talk to him, to feel him near." She turned to Daniel. "You've given me a gift I didn't know I needed. Thank you for building this. Thank you for caring about 2 old soldiers you never met. Thank you for making my father's sacrifice visible." Daniel couldn't speak. He nodded, overwhelmed. Margaret spoke next, telling stories of her Uncle Thomas, his love of this land, his dedication to his men, his choice to die in service rather than in a hospital. Then other veterans came forward one by one and shared their stories. Some had known James or Thomas. Others were strangers to everyone but connected by shared service, shared struggles, shared scars. The ceremony lasted 2 hours. When it ended, people lingered, walking the property, reading the plaque, standing beneath the flag. Daniel moved through the crowd, shaking hands, accepting embraces, listening to stories. A young veteran approached, couldn't have been more than 25, with new scars and old eyes. "Are you really letting people stay here?" The sign said. "Yes," Daniel said. "We have a guest room in the main house and we're building cabins, no charge. Just a place to be quiet, to heal." "I was in a really dark place yesterday," the veteran said, his voice breaking. "Really dark. My dog Atlas saved me." Daniel's chest constricted. "Your dog?" "Same name as yours. Heard him barking, needed him. By the time I took care of him, I was thinking clearer." He looked at the field. "Then I heard about this place. Thought maybe that's a sign." Daniel gripped the young man's shoulder. "What's your name?" "Tyler." "Tyler, the guest room is yours. Tonight, next week, next month, however long you need. My number's on the sign. Call any time. I mean that, any time." Tyler's face crumpled. "Thank you." After the crowd dispersed, after the last car drove away, Daniel sat on his porch with Betty and Margaret and William. Atlas lay sprawled in the yard, exhausted from all the attention. The flag snapped in the breeze, 48 stars catching the afternoon sun. "We did it," Margaret said softly. "Uncle Tom would be so proud." "Dad would be proud too," Betty added. She was crying but smiling. He would have loved this, loved knowing his sacrifice still means something. "It's not done," Daniel said. "Tyler, that young vet, he's coming back tonight. And there'll be others. This is just the beginning." William nodded. "We'll help, whatever you need. More cabins, more resources, whatever it takes." Betty leaned back in her chair, looking frail but content. "I've been thinking. I want to establish a foundation, the Morrison Whitmore Foundation, dedicated to supporting places like this, sanctuaries for veterans. Would you manage it, Daniel?" He stared at her. "I'm not qualified." "You're the most qualified person I know," she interrupted. "You understand, you've been there, you know what's needed." "I can handle the legal work," William offered. "Pro bono. It's the least I can do." Daniel looked at the field, at the memorial, at the house he'd built with his own hands. 6 months ago, he'd been counting $47 and contemplating sleeping in his car. Now he was being offered a chance to build something that could help thousands. "Yes," he said. "I'll do it." Betty smiled. "Good, then let's get to work." They spent the evening planning. More cabins, a small retreat center, programs for therapy dogs, partnerships with the VA. Betty wrote checks and William took notes and Margaret told stories, and Daniel listened and contributed and slowly began to believe in the impossible. That night, after everyone left, after Tyler arrived and Daniel showed him to the guest room, after Atlas finally settled for sleep, Daniel walked out to the memorial alone. The solar light illuminated the flag, making it glow against the dark sky. He stood before the plaque and traced the letters of Captain Whitmore's name with his finger. "I'm keeping the promise," he whispered. "I'm doing what you asked, and I'm going to make sure no one else gets forgotten. No more soldiers dying alone, no more flags buried where no one can see them." The wind moved through the grass, and for just a moment, Daniel could have sworn he heard something. Not words exactly, but acknowledgement, understanding, gratitude. He saluted the flag, crisp and proper, the way he'd learned in basic training. Then he went inside to his home, his sanctuary, his purpose. Atlas was waiting by the door, tail wagging. Daniel knelt and buried his face in the dog's fur. "We found it, boy," he said. "We found what we were looking for." And as he stood and looked around his small house, at Tyler sleeping in the guest room, at the field visible through the window, at the flag flying proud and bright, Daniel Thompson understood that sometimes the greatest treasures aren't found by searching. They're found by digging where you're planted, by showing up, by keeping promises to people you've never met, by believing that land can choose its people and that dead soldiers can still save lives and that a flag buried in the earth for 60 years can still fly high enough to guide lost souls home. He went to bed with a full heart and a clear conscience. Tomorrow he'd start building the second cabin. Tomorrow he'd call the VA about partnerships. Tomorrow he'd continue the work. But tonight, he rested. And for the first time in years, when sleep came, it brought no nightmares, only peace. Sometimes the greatest act of honor is keeping a promise to someone you never met. If Daniel's story moved you, share it with a veteran who needs to know their sacrifice still matters. And remember, you never know what's buried beneath your feet, waiting for the right person to unearth it. Subscribe for more stories of courage, compassion, and promises kept across generations.